Hi everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Inside 60 Days, the after-show panel discussion that goes inside the A&E TV series featuring the Clark County Jail. If you're still catching up, 60 Days In is a show that follows 7 people who volunteered to stay at the Clark County Jail as inmates for 2 months. I'm joined by Jennifer Ortiz, a criminal justice professor at Indiana University Southeast, and Major Sam Beard, jail commander at the Clark County Jail. I'm Elizabeth DePompe, the public safety reporter for the News and Tribune. Thank you both for joining us again. Let's go ahead and jump into episode 3, which aired last night. The thing that jumped out most to me was that we saw some of the violence and fighting that can happen inside a jail. Major Beard, if you can talk a little bit about how often that kind of thing happens and how your officers have to respond.
Well, our officers respond quite quickly. That's why last night when the 2 people went in the cell, that's where they go, where they think they're undetected. We respond to every act of violence, some quicker than others. If you've seen them go in, and when the inmates gather around, if you see more than inmates go in there that's housing there, you're supposed to go in and check. So that raises suspicion for me.
Right. And that room that they were in was called the Thunderdome. Is that right?
The Thunderdome, yes, ma'am. It was stenciled on the back of the wall. Thunderdome, I don't know. But a fight happened back there. We responded as soon as we knew about it, and I've seen worse.
Let me ask a viewer question here from @Shun812 on Twitter, kind of speaking to this. Do the guards watch for trouble and try to prevent fights, or do they wait for fisticuffs to break out before entering the pod? Talk a little bit more about how officers are watching what's going on, whether it's from the door or from the security cameras, and at what point they really get involved.
Well, every officer has to do a watch tour once an hour, and we try to make it on an irregular basis. Of course, you don't want to go 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, because the inmates can predict that. But you got to believe me, they live there so long that they can predict who does what at what time. Like, they know my schedule, they know what kind of vehicle I drive. Inmates are very observant. But we try to be proactive at the jail. But if you notice, that fight went on in C-Pod, when the carts come in, and when the carts left, who was there? Who was the inmate there? Tommy Roby.
Right.
And when Maples asked him about it in that show, Mr. Roby said, they're just misguided missiles. Yeah. I knew nothing about it. He knew what was going to happen because who was the main guy in that section?
Right. And for those who don't remember, Roby is the pod boss, as we learned
yes.
In the premiere episode. Jennifer, let me ask you, in your experience, in your study, how much is physical fighting kind of ingrained in this culture of jail and prison, and what are the consequences of that?
Well, I think every single individual I spoke with described violent incidences that they had experienced. I think violence becomes normalized, and I think it just becomes part of their culture and the only way that they address problems. But again, as you saw in the episode, it's very regulated, right? They are timing when the trays are leaving, and they know that when the trays are leaving, those correction officers are leaving, and they'll be gone for at least a few minutes before they realize what's happening. And you saw as soon as the door closed, that inmate got up and just went inside of that cell. And I've had guys describe that type of cell to me, and it's always the last cell, the one furthest away from the cameras, that's slightly out of view, that is designated as like the fight room inside of facilities.
And then how do you see that once these people are released, how that carries into their real life? If they're now used to dealing with arguments and issues by fighting, is that something they tend to continue in the real world?
I think so. I mean, I've spoken to individuals who were incarcerated for nonviolent offenses who came out very angry, very violent people, and described spiraling out of control and just resorting to anger towards everyone, towards their children, towards their partners, just towards everyone. And it just became part of their personality, even though it wasn't part of their personality when they entered the facility.
Can I speak on this? We have the most programs of any facility in this state. We have graduated more inmates from GED than any other jail in the state. We have a program called Lifeline Connections. In that is an anger management class. These inmates have tools. Now, some people, Roby figures he's not going to get out and lead a productive life. He's an older gentleman. You know, he'll do the programs for a time cut. But when Sheriff Noel come in, his thing was, we got to give these people the ability to change their life. And I don't know that A&E went up there and filmed any of that, and I'm not cutting them down, but we had something going on all day long up in our training classes. We try to deal with anger issues. We know it's a problem. Now, if they want to participate, we can't force them.
Sure. Well, let me ask, before we move on, that area of the Thunderdome where the cameras weren't really catching anything, do you know, has that changed? Have there been more cameras put there?
A&E left their cameras for us, and we're fine tuning where those things are positioned. You know, again, you know, I know that everybody, but we have young corrections officers who really want to do a good job, but things that me and Miss Ortiz would see, they don't see. But you're talking about 21, 22-year-old people.
Right. Let me go to another viewer question, which is lighthearted, but I think leads to a good question. At Oliver Noodle asks, just how good are these tater tots? For those who missed it or catching up, there was a fight over a very physical fight over basically a unpaid debt, and that currency in this case were tater tots or hash browns. When you explain how something like food, like tater tots, can turn into a physical fight and how it's used as currency in jail?
Well, I mean, I personally think tater tots are delicious. I'm not sure I'd be willing to fight over them. But when you have to understand prison or jail rather, as its own society, right? And so in society we have currency. And when you remove the currency, you just use something else to replace currency. I mean, just the same way that you replace laws with the convict code, and you replace, you know, what you usually speak with some type of prison argot or some type of language. So I think it's just part of their society, and they use what they have to pay back debts, and what they have is food.
Jail by nature is an aggressive place. Everybody, all the inmates talk about respect, getting respect. They'll disrespect the officers in a heartbeat, but there's some code in there. And the tater tots are delicious. I've ate many tater tots from the jail. The jail food is by state standards is really good. You know, everybody says I wouldn't eat that food. I would. Man, when you're in the middle of a jail and lunchtime comes and you don't have any ability to get out, we put money on our books. Officers get trays for $1.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask, do you think there are parts of the jail culture and code, like the tater tots, maybe even the physical altercations, just some of the rules that, like you said, it's kind of by nature an aggressive place. So how much of it really can you completely eliminate? And do you have to let some of it be because that's kind of the code that they live by, if that makes sense?
You'll never eliminate all of it. Mm-hmm. You know, my big issue in 35 years, and I try to make the staff aware of it, is watch the inmate lines. When they line up for chow, when they line up for pill call, the most violent acts I've seen in prison is not because somebody stole somebody's tater tots, it's because here's a guy in the line ready to eat, and a guy jumps in front of him. And this guy's mindset is, if I don't handle this guy, then I'm never going to eat. That's the mindset in a jail and a prison society. So the lines are important. An officer, if you notice, we'll give them a tray. We'll make sure they get a tray. But what they do, we can't stay in there and watch them eat. So how are you going to monitor that if you don't have somebody in each section when they eat?
I also think that you can't put a bunch of people in a confined space and force them to live together and not expect them to get angry. I mean, I always teach my students the analogy, if you ever take a long road trip with someone, you can love that person as soon as you get in the car, and by the time you're done, you just hate that person. Like, you're angry, like, you're just tired of, like, all their little small things that they do that aggravate you. I think it's kind of almost natural for us to be angry when we're stuck with the same people. And in jail, you can't change your situation. You can't remove yourself from those people. So I'm not sure we can really get rid of all of the fighting and all of the tension that exists.
I have another viewer question from @JennaBahamas, and she asks, why do they never leave the pods? Why no structure? Which I think we're starting to get to there. Barbara talks about in the F pod, she's never been so lazy, she has nothing to do, nobody does anything. Major Beard, if you can speak to how true that is, that there really isn't structure when they are leaving the pods.
That's the most disturbing thing I've seen. And I get invited to watch it with people, but I have to watch it by myself. When I was at Clark County before I left in 2011, you had to have your pod clean before you got the TV and before you got the phone. But we had such a horrific mess when Sheriff Knoll took over. I mean, the inmates ran the jail, so we're doing this step by step. I call it phases. We're about phase 2 in a five-phase program we're going to set up. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Structure is very important. Like I was telling before we went on camera, if we don't make these people follow rules in jail, how are they going to follow the law when they get out?
I also think you can be as lazy as you decide to be, because it's, I mean, if you see what's happening in C-Pod, they are working out, they are cleaning after every single meal, they are keeping themselves busy. In D-Pod, they had an inmate Bible study. So I feel like you can keep yourself busy if you're choosing not to do anything, and Barbara is choosing to stay away from everyone. Mm-hmm. Then I think that is more of a choice, because there are programs, there are things to do. I think it's a misconception what she's trying to say, as though inmates just lounge around all day and really do absolutely nothing. Mm-hmm. But also, they're 24 hours in a day. You're stuck in one place. It's not like you can choose to take a walk in the park or choose to go grocery shopping. She may be very busy in real life because she's a stay-at-home mother, so she sees her life as more hectic. Of course, jail's going to slow down your pace.
Right. How do you think the people who choose, like Barbara, to kind of stay away and maybe not do anything, how do you think they cope differently from the people who keep themselves on some kind of schedule?
Well, I think time goes by really slowly when you're doing nothing, mm-hmm. you know. And I think at one point she says 2 days feels like 2 months. Time goes so slow. But if you're doing things, I think time would speed up. It would seem to go faster. So I think it's actually harder for them, because they're realizing every second, every minute as it goes by.
Right. Let's talk about a couple of the inmates who seem to be coping a little better and adjusting. We spoke last week about Zach and Tammy. Listening to Zach narrate kind of what's going on, I mean, he seems to have a real understanding, but we do see him slip up big time in last night's episode, where he calls another inmate, jokingly it seems, the B word. And they were told in training, basically the one thing you don't say, the one thing you don't call another inmate for any reason, is the B word. Is Zach getting too comfortable, and could that affect the dynamics in the pod, or how people treat him?
Zach did slip up, and he made another mistake. He tried to explain his way out of it over and over. I think that's the worst thing you can do. The best thing he could have did, man, sorry, and just left it at that. But he kept on. I call my children, my sons that, really? He went too far the other way. Zach is handling himself well, and I haven't seen the rest of the programs. So I think Zach's going to run into trouble.
Mm-hmm. What do you say?
He did make a mistake, but he instantly realized his mistake. I do think he spent too much time trying to explain it instead of just saying, listen, I'm sorry, like, it slipped.
I mean, he reacted
instantly.
Like, he jumped up
immediately. The second the word left his mouth, he realized. But I do think he is getting quite comfortable with the fact that he was invited to have a slam with these inmates, to have that, like, commissary-style cookout. The fact that he's already betting with them, which is one thing that scared me, because the one thing that causes the most violence is always debt. And I got scared when he was gambling on a football game. Luckily, it was just push-ups, but what if it was something, tangible?
Well, I think Zach's smart enough not to bet on anything tangible. You know, push-ups, he's an ex-Marine, you know, he feels like he's got this push-up thing. So Zach's learning the culture. He's lived in that kind of environment like you brought to light last week, and he's learning the culture, and he's fitting in. You can see C-Pod's getting to like him, and guess what? He's got the favor of the pod balls too.
Right. Let's talk about Tammy, who's also seems to be doing pretty well. She gets the shower shoes back that she lost last week. And when she realizes that she did something right, she stood up for herself and people maybe respect her, she even says, I kind of like that. Was that surprising to you to hear her say that? And is there something about this environment that can be, if you're successful, that it's rewarding?
It was surprising to me that she was able to get other inmates to get her shoes back so quickly. She was only in for, I think, 3 days at that point. Yeah. And she had already, basically, I don't know what to call the person, like a minion or something, that she's gotten someone to basically do the work for her. That surprised me. I don't think it's surprising that she feels some sense of power or some sense of happiness from having that power. Right.
How do you think that would have played out in D section?
Well, I wanted to ask you. I would think differently.
Well, Tammy, by her stature, sort of garnishes respect. She looks like she can get physical at any time. So when somebody like strong comes in, or they perceive to be as strong, just by that nature, you're going to get some people behind you.
Right.
But that's the difference between the female pod and the male pods. See, that is a sign of disrespect. If you come up and take my shoes, and I know you got my shoes, man, that would have kicked off a war in 3D.
So an inmate who doesn't seem to be doing as well and has disrespected the other inmates, or at least that's how they take it, is Robert, who tends to stand out in the show. There's a lot to talk about Robert, but I want to talk something that we were speaking about earlier. We found out that Robert appeared on a reality TV show before, a TLC show. Doesn't look like he went past the first episode. I actually spoke with Robert briefly yesterday. He said he has no interest in being an actor like some people are accusing him of being, but he did pursue it years ago. Knowing that about him, does that change how you watch the episodes or watch the show with him, and do you think it has a negative impact on this whole experience?
What would it change? I mean, you got a guy going into jail, has never been there before. We did extensive backgrounds on these people. Now we did criminal backgrounds. Of course, we don't want to take somebody that's a user out on the street and plan them in our jail because they'll seek that. We and A&E had no knowledge of Robert ever doing that. And what does that change? I mean, he was in the environment. What did that change? It changed nothing. Robert's got this attitude. He's cocky, he's abrasive. He got into trouble. This was real life stuff happening.
Jennifer, how about you?
So it doesn't affect the way I watch the show. I wonder if maybe somewhere inside he had some ulterior motive that maybe he doesn't want to admit to now, maybe because he realizes how foolish he looks on TV, and all of the social media response to Robert is like, what is wrong with this guy? I had someone tell me I've never disliked someone I didn't know so much so fast. Right. And maybe there was some ulterior motive. Maybe he did think this is a show about me. But I'm pretty sure he quickly realized that he had probably made a mistake, that this wasn't his, 15 minutes of fame or something.
Right. Sheriff Noah, I spoke to him yesterday. He, kind of said the same, that he thinks Robert eventually realized it, and that they were still able to learn things from him despite whatever reason that he was there for. But let's go ahead and maybe look forward a little bit. We've seen the preview for the next episode. Was there anything that intrigued you? Anything that you're looking forward to unfolding next week?
I'm wanting to follow Isaiah. He hasn't got much off his bunk. He just stays up there, and he's shocked, but he's not even interacting with anybody. Barbara in 3F, is that her name, Barbara?
Yes.
If I would have been a pod officer, I would have contacted our psychiatric, because she had her head down all the time. She stayed on her bunk. To me, that's a sign she's depressed. And what you don't want somebody killing herself in jail. And as I watched Barbara develop, she was in shock.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how she starts coping. Tammy kind of is taking her under her wing, it seems. What are you looking forward to?
I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what happens with Isaiah and how he adapts. I'm interested to see the last participant comes in, enters in the next episode to see how he adapts to it. And I'm also not excited, but I'm curious to see whether the inmates do take advantage of Robert, because he seems very ignorant to the fact when the guy says, there's this great book that I want, because he realizes that Robert has money and Robert has these fancy earbuds and all this stuff. I'm curious to see if they will actually take advantage of him and his commissary.
Right. All right, well, very good. Thank you both again for another great discussion. Thank you all for tuning into this episode of Inside 60 Days. Please visit newsandtribune.com for a recap of last night's episode, as well as more coverage of the Clark County Jail. To ask our panelists your own questions, tweet us at @newsandtribune using the hashtag Inside60Days. Thanks for tuning in, and hope you come back next week.